This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Church attendance has dwindled across all faiths, but for Catholics, 39% say they attend services at least once a week. That's according to a Pew Research study. The Archdiocese of Hartford includes more than 400,000 Catholics across Connecticut. In a few weeks, Archbishop Christopher Coyne will officially be installed as the new head of the district. He joined the Archdiocese of Hartford last year and will oversee its more than 100 churches and 36 Catholic schools. That's according to the Archdiocese. Today, we talk about the future of the Catholic Church here in Connecticut and beyond. Plus, we'll discuss the Dignitas Infinita, which is a recent document from the Vatican with statements on gender identity and gender-affirming surgery, surrogacy, and human dignity. And he joins us in the studio now. Welcome, Archbishop Coyne.
Thank you, and good morning.
Good morning to you. And for our listeners, let us know if you have any questions for the Archbishop, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So, Archbishop, we were just talking earlier that you're still pretty new to Connecticut, coming to us from Vermont. But tell us, what have you learned about the state? What have you been up to in terms of learning about us, serving the Catholic population here?
What I've learned more than anything else is the cultural diversity of the state, as well as the immigration diversity, the diversity within the church. There's 15 significant language groups that are being served by the Catholic Church in the three counties of Archdiocese of Hartford. There's also parts of the Archdiocese that are very rural, especially when you get into the northwest corner, and the churches there are few and far between. But then you get into places like Hartford, around Hartford, Waterbury, around New Britain, various places, New Haven, where the churches are not few and far between. They're quite packed quite on top of each other for different historical reasons. And as the Catholic community morphs into different directions, from being a church of immigrants of the European communities to immigrants that are much more diverse, people from Ghana, people from Vietnam, people from Burundi, all those various communities that we're serving, that calls for a kind of reimagining of how we serve our people.
And is that very different from your experience in Vermont, or similar?
Vermont is the least diverse state in the country. It's still like 94% of Vermonters are Caucasian. And when I first got to Vermont and I was looking at the various cultures and looking at levels of poverty within the cultures and all that, and there was a large significant group of people in Vermont who were Caucasian impoverished. But then when I got to the walking down through the various cultural levels, I got to the African American, and they did not even they had no numbers, because there's just no significant population to check. We didn't really have a large number of Spanish-speaking people, because they just haven't migrated to Vermont. So moving from Vermont to here is different, but it's also I've enjoyed meeting being part of the various communities. I was just with a very large Polish church on Sunday, and they presented me with, they had all the kids dressed up, and they presented me with Polish candies and cookies, even though I'm diabetic. And
it's the thought that
I started
counts.
laughing. Well, that was the same thing in Vermont when they'd always give me maple syrup. So there were a lot of giveaways, and it was just wonderful. And then I was been with the Vietnamese community, and I just met with a priest from Ghana yesterday. So it's just a lot of fun.
And with the process of learning being ongoing, and you're meeting these different communities, what are some of your immediate priorities within the Archdiocese?
I think one of my immediate priorities is for me to just get out and meet people. Since I came here in October, I've been all over the Archdiocese of Hartford. I've visited 22 out of the 36 schools so far, and visiting various parishes. You could probably just check out the numbers on that. And meeting people, listening to people, going to events, working with my staff, and also the priests to try and reinvigorate what we do, to talk positively about what we do, to hold up and continue to support the large number of social services that are offered through the Catholic Church. In the United States, the Catholic Church is the number one private provider of social services by far. and we continue to do that. And it's the same thing here in Hartford. We have soup kitchens, we have food pantries, we have outreach to shut-ins, we have shelters, we have community sharing and caring for the new peoples that have come in. So I want to just continue to support that and enliven that. And, one of the things I've found is that in Hartford, we don't have a Catholic school right now. We have no Catholic schools in Hartford, not high school or parochial school. And that needs to change because we need to be with and I'm not talking about schools for Catholics, I'm talking about schools for everybody. So maybe looking into the possibility of a non-tuition school in some of our more impoverished neighborhoods in the city of Hartford, as well as in some of the other impoverished neighborhoods in Waterbury and New Haven, and all those places, to try and be there as we have been in the past, to try and give people the leg up that they need, and through our good care.
Well, and then you just mentioning, this, you talking about a Catholic school doesn't necessarily mean that's just for Catholics. It's for everyone. And on top of that, talking about support services that the Catholic Church provides, and also the invigoration. Can you talk more about, how do you see your role as Archbishop, as well as do you see your role as serving more than just those who are formally a part of the Catholic Church?
Okay. So I know that your audience is very wide and diverse, but I have to answer your question, I have to speak from a place of faith. I am first a disciple of the Lord Jesus Christ, and I love the Lord Jesus Christ with all my heart, all my soul, all my being. I seek to serve him. I want others to know him as well. I do it within the Catholic faith. I believe that the Catholic faith holds the truth for how we should live and move in this world. I don't do that out of a sense of triumphalism. It's just who I am. I've given my life to a truth, not to an opinion. I'd say that. That's, you can see, it's kind of being a little cliche in saying that because I say it all the time. But so first and foremost, I want to be that disciple. I want to be with other people. I want to walk with them, and I want them to know what I have. But out of that discipleship comes a call. It's not just a call to prayer. It's not just a call to sit in a chapel. It's not just a call to sit in a church. It's a call to go out to the margins and to go out and do what we do. Catholics do what we do. We feed the poor. We shelter the homeless. We care for those in need. We educate, irregardless we don't ask people, are you Catholic? Are you this? Are you that? We just do what we do. We take care of people. And I want to continue to stress that more and more, that we have that depth of faith that then draws us out from ourselves into others and see others as our brothers and sisters, even if it's hard to see someone as your brother or sister, and to walk with them and accompany them along their lives.
And I think with that in mind too, earlier we talked about, or we mentioned the Dignitas Infinita, which was released by the Vatican last week. And for those who might not know what this is, but this document outlines the Church's views on different social and moral issues. And one of the biggest takeaways, I think, was its criticism of gender-affirming procedures and the Vatican's view on gender as a clear binary. Was this surprising for you? And what does this mean for the LGBTQ parishioners and their allies?
Well, we've been dealing with this issue now for a number of years, and I think it's very important for us to continue to dialogue over it. And it does move each of us, I hope, in different directions. It's pulled me more into a place of understanding and care. When someone comes to me and identifies, even though it's few and far between for all kinds of reasons, when someone does identify themselves as a transgender person, or they ask and say, I'd like to be referred to by this pronoun or whatever, I say, okay, it doesn't cost me anything to accept you as you want to present yourself to me. I'm not going to get off on my high and mighty horse and all of a sudden say, well, I won't accept that. I'll accept you as a person. And this all started too in many ways in Vermont when we were dealing with some transgender children or children with gender dysphoria in our schools. And when we sat down, I said, first of all, we have to sit down and just let this child know that we love them and that we care about them and that we believe them and we want to listen to them. And we want to get their families involved if it can happen, and to begin to walk with them and help them kind of discern where they're going and take them as far as we can. We've had in Vermont, we had a couple of families who said at the end of it they said we can't our child just can't stay here because she or he or whatever is dealing with this, and they need to go to another place, and that they can't in this school. But they left saying, but we thank you for the support that you gave us. We thank you for the kindness that you did this. And in one instance, the child actually came back because when they went to a public school or wherever, they felt that they weren't as supported as they actually were supported in our Catholic schools. So I guess the starting point is that everyone is welcome. There's no, you don't have to pass a test to belong. I'll tell you a story, a personal story. One of my nieces, I have two nieces that identify as lesbians, but they also identify as women, and they're very comfortable with that. And one of them first came out in high school, and I walked with her and my family. She's, wonderful woman, but she was asked, I forget where it was, but it was in one of her classes. She's into social work and all that, and I think it was something like, what's going on? She said, well, I'm going to go to Good Friday services, and then I'm going to go to Easter. And someone said, well, how can you do that? You're a lesbian. She said, I was born in this faith. I was raised in this faith. I'm loved in this faith, and no one's kicking me out. And that's my approach is we all are welcome. We walk with each other. We accompany each other. We don't leave each other. We try and grow together.
Well, and it sounds like your view might be a little different from what we've seen come out from the Vatican, and from what you described, it seems very natural for you to walk with the people that you love. Do you anticipate getting any pushback from Catholics from this? Do we get a sense of what Connecticut Catholics feel about this?
I don't think they should be surprised. This is nothing new. We weren't going to see anything new. This is a document that came out of a dicastery or congregation, Doctrine of Faith. It's 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Dignity. It's been in process for 3 years. It's got 62 sections. One section deals with gender identity and sex change, and then some of the the birth, parental. I'm drawing a blank on it. Surrogacy, thanks. But the rest of it's, the document is a wonderful document about the dignity of each and every person. And the Pope delves into issues such as situation of migrants, violence against women, human trafficking, and other themes. All those things are lifted up as things that we need to address and confront. Now, I get it. Some people say, well, that's all well and good, but you're still falling off the map when you're dealing with these issues here. But the fact is that it starts from our basic theology of that male and female were created by God, and there's a certain dignity in that reality. How it's lived out in gender is another thing. But when you start talking about biology and all that, we've been very consistent and continue to be very consistent. This is who we are, and I don't see this coming out of a place of hatred or bigotry against folks. Some might say that our teaching is misguided, misunderstood, misinformed, but I've done a lot of reading on all this stuff, and I think there's still a lot of conversation that needs to happen as we move forward on these issues.
Well, and as those conversations continue to move forward, I do want to share a couple thoughts, because from Catholic LGBTQ groups who have been highly critical of the document, saying that it failed to acknowledge the experience of transgender and non-binary individuals. And they have said it limits the church's understanding of human dignity, and the New Ways ministry says that the text fails terribly. And there's a big focus on the phrase human dignity, as you mentioned earlier as well, Archbishop. So can we talk about, how can denying the experience and the validity of a transgender individual coincide with preserving human dignity? Why isn't the dignity of a trans person considered the same way?
I don't see this as denying the dignity of a person who's dealing with a trans person or a person who's dealing with gender issues or whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. I see it as a place where how do you deal with it? How do you best help people to find their way? Now, let's say, well, who are you to tell me how to do this? This is what we believe. You can choose not to accept the church's teaching on human sexuality or biology. I will say that we do stand on science. I mean, people say that the Catholic Church at times is anti-science, which I really don't get. But I mean, biology is biology. You're either XX or XY, and that's a scientific fact that you can't unprove that fact. And so, the document isn't standing on just kind of a theological, spiritual approach. It's pretty much dealing on science. And even my saying that is going to be heard by others as being offensive. But I firmly believe that as well.
And because this is something that is still ongoing, do you feel any concerns that the Vatican's position on this will worsen the climate for trans people in the U.S., especially with the increase of legislation targeting this population?
I think a lot of it is let's not rush to come to a conclusion on these matters until we've really had the chance to study them, talk them out, see where they're leading us. There are all kinds of things that are coming out now, like the Cass report over in Europe and England, that are challenging the conceived notions about how best to deal with, especially deal with trans children that are dealing with transgender issues, that are dealing with just gender dysphoria or transgender children, whatever phrase you want to use. So those are the kinds of questions that I think must be dealt with and must be asked for the long-term effect and health of our children. As far as if someone's in their own right and their own wish desires to take things further and even seeking to have a sex change procedure, either pharmaceutically or biologically or whatever, that's their choice. The church is just offering our opinion from our faith, saying there are other ways that this can go. If your starting point is that every person is created in the likeness and image of God, that God created us male and female, that God created us in the human dignity to live there, that we live out of that dignity, we embrace the creation that God has given us. People who have gender dysphoria and all that can choose to live that out in different ways. I mean, you can have a biological man who presents himself as a woman, but he's still biologically a man, and that's not what we're talking about. I always see gender as different from biology. Perhaps it's simplistic, but that's what I feel.
Well, and this year, Pope Francis also announced that any priest could perform blessings, but not marriages for same-sex couples. So we'd love to get your thoughts on that. Are you hearing and seeing any priests here in Connecticut that are performing these blessings? I'm
not. Well, there's few, different places, but not in terms of ordained priests for the Archdiocese of Hartford. And I think it's not necessarily because they're denying it. I just think a lot of same-sex couples wouldn't want to come to us for the reasons that we're talking about. Same-sex couples, people who are gay, have left the church, and but I've been to places where I know various men and women who are married and same-sex couples that have been in the cathedral in Burlington and other places. They're welcome, and we try to maintain that. But I just think the reality is that most people who are in same-sex marriages don't need the blessing of the Catholic Church to affirm their love for each other.
And are you having conversations with those same-sex couples?
No, no one's approached me. It's more anecdotal than I hear, but there's not been a rush to the altar. Let me just say that. There's not been a rush to the blessings.
You've been listening to Coadjutor Archbishop Christopher Coyne of the Archdiocese of Hartford. If you have any questions or a comment for the Archbishop, give us a call, 888-720-9677, or leave us a comment on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Today, we're hearing from Archbishop Christopher Coyne of the Archdiocese of Hartford. The Archdiocese of Hartford is not immune to scandal and scrutiny like many dioceses within the Catholic Church. In 2019, the Archdiocese paid more than $50 million to settle priest sex abuse claims within the diocese. And just a heads up for our listeners that this segment, we will be discussing child and sexual abuse. But you can also join the conversation and let us know if you have any questions. Give us a call, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So Archbishop, we know that child abuse and sexual abuse has been a huge conversation in the Catholic Church space. Can you talk about how you will handle and respond to these incidences as they come up, or what do you want our listeners to know about what the church is doing to prevent these abuses?
Sure. Since 2000, the number of incidents involving clergy or people who work for the church or with the church involving minors has absolutely decreased to almost a 0% in terms of new cases. So when I was in Vermont for 9 years, there was not a single new case that came forward of abuse of a minor by a priest or deacon. And I haven't heard anything new here in Hartford. And I think that's because the church here in Hartford and the church in Vermont and all over the United States and elsewhere has, in fact, done everything it can to make sure this never happens again. And we've done it not only through being vigilant and watching for these things, but also through education. All of our volunteers, all of our priests, all of our clergy, anybody who works with a child in the Catholic Church in the United States has to go through formal training called Virtus training or whatever it may be, the other monikers, to not only learn more and more about boundaries when working with children and to maintain those boundaries, but also to be vigilant and to watch for situations where a child may be at risk because of a boundary issue. And in a number of instances, I will say in Vermont, there were a number of instances where reports were made of somebody working for the church who was not following proper boundaries, and looked like there was some grooming going on. And we stepped right in, took care of that. And it's the same here. The other great outcome of this is in our schools especially, because we're trained now to look for the symptoms or the evidence of abuse of a minor. We've had instances where the child has been protected because not from a priest, but from outside of the school. There could be a parent, could be an uncle, could be a neighbor. And because we're now trained to look for these things, we're able to intervene or through social services. That's the first thing. Second thing is, I'll say, in terms of the way it's handled here and everywhere else, when there is an allegation made against anyone who works for the church, especially clergy, we turn it over to the law enforcement right away. We do not do our own kind of investigation. We stay out of the way. We go to the Department of Children and Families. I don't know what they call it here in Vermont, DFC or DCF. Not in Vermont, Hartford. We would go to the state police, we would go to the sheriff, we would go to the local police, and we would immediately make the allegation known. And because we're mandatory, we have accepted to be mandatory reporters. We follow on that. That's what we do. We get out of the way, and then we let law enforcement do what it does, and then we would proceed in terms of working with taking care of the situation.
Well, and then so you and I are having this conversation today, and we know that there's a structure in place, like you mentioned, in terms of the church stepping in. Can you talk about, we're talking about this right now, and more people are talking about it today, but why has this issue been historically ignored, or do we not know about it?
I mean, are we talking what happened way back in the terms of like the allegations that unfolded from the Boston Globe in 2001, 2002, 2003? I think it was a culture of clericalism. I think it was a culture of shame. I think that the culture was one in which this kind of behavior was allowed to happen. That there were, for all kinds of unfortunate reasons, these things could be covered up because people saw they didn't want their child to be known as this having happened to them. There was all kinds of settlements that involved non-disclosure. You couldn't talk about it. All those things. I think it was a vast, and it was also sin. I mean, these priests were allowed to do it. It was sinful. It was awful, but they thought it was a spiritual problem. Just send the guy off for spiritual direction or psychology, and we can fix them. But especially when you're dealing with pedophiles, that's not fixable. We've realized that now. But what we should have done is recognize the first thing, the most important thing, is not the protection of the priesthood, not the protection of the church, but the protection of children. And we didn't do that. Now, we get it, first and foremost. And we, in a lot of ways, I'll admit it, we got it because, because we got beat with a big stick, public humiliation, lawsuits, millions and millions of dollars. So, but I hope, like I do, I hope that most of us realize that the reason why we don't do this is because we're going to get hit. It's because it's the right thing to do. That's what I hope we are.
I'm going to do a little pivot here because you have also previously spoken out about giving women a more formal role in the Catholic Church, specifically speaking about ordaining women as deacons, but you also say ordaining women into priesthood is case closed. So what do you envision here to give women a meaningful role and voice in the church where there's still so much decision-making that's being made by men?
Sure. I would go with a personal experience that I've had as a bishop. And when I was in the Diocese of Burlington, the cabinet which was made up of executive level positions of the Archdiocese, was more than half women. At times there was only like maybe 2 or 3 of us in the room. The rest of the people around the table were women. I'm going to do everything that I can here in the Archdiocese of Hartford to bring women to the table, to not only put them in positions of administration, but also let them administer, let them make decisions, let them be part of decisions. So I'm trying to move outside of the more formal structure of ordination into a kind of more administrative structure in which the voice of women who make up more than 50% of the people who actually go to church, and most of your parishes are staffed by women, and most of your volunteers and churches are women. So you have to acknowledge that. So I'm just doing everything I can to empower, to listen to hear. And a couple of times around the table in Burlington, I would come up with something, and boy, the women let me have it because I was a little bit paternalistic or tone deaf. So I learned my lessons, and I also grew up with 3 strong sisters too, and they let me have it as well.
Well, as you continue to be let-haved and learn and listen to the people and support the people, we've talked about a lot of things in just this short conversation. But in a time where 28% of adults are religiously unaffiliated, what do you think is the future of the Catholic Church? What is that looking like for you think?
Well, first of all, we're not going anywhere. We're here. We are who we are. This is the Catholic faith. We're moving into a new era. ERA of faith, I think. I think we're moving from the church, well, we obviously are moving from the church of the majority, the church of the culture, to one that's a missionary church, one that is a church of intentionally discipleship. People once were part of the Catholic faith because it was kind of a habitual culture. Now people come to church because they want to. There's an intentionality to it. And so it's a different way of recognizing. But I also think we have to be willing to move out of ourselves and be a welcoming people, and to make sure that when someone walks through the doors of our churches, they come to a place that's healthy, that's safe, and that's happy. And that's not necessarily the situation in a lot of places, As I heard someone say at a table one time, I went to a Catholic church, and she said, it was like I was going to a funeral. And she said it just kind of was very sad. And we can turn that around.
Well, you mentioned invigoration earlier in the conversation, and as we end this hour, we'd love to get some final thoughts from you for our listeners. What do you hope our listeners take away from this, and what do you hope to do here in Hartford?
I hope that listeners take away from this somebody who is a strong believer in this Catholic faith, someone who holds to the truth of the Catholic Church, but also wants to walk with people. None of us is perfect within the vast majority of the teaching of the Church. We all fall short. And that needs to be remembered over and over again, that we accompany each other along the line of faith, that we grow with each other along the line of faith. And that's I want to walk with people. I want to be with people. I want to listen to people. I want to be open and transparent. I am open and transparent. I'm not someone who dissimulates, and I just want to preach the joy of my life, the joy of what I have, and I try to bring others to come to it as well.
Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts and joy with us today, Archbishop. Appreciate your time.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Archbishop Christopher Coyne, who has joined us in the studio to share his thoughts and joy. Just a quick reminder for our listeners that Connecticut Public is having its Spring Pledge Drive. You can visit ctpublic.org/donate to support Where We Live. Here's 2 of my colleagues to tell you more.
Support for
This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. We just heard from Archbishop Christopher Coyne, who's the new Archbishop of Hartford. And joining us now to put this conversation in perspective is Joshua McElwee. He's news editor of National Catholic Reporter, and he joins us today from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for being here with us, Joshua.
Yeah, it's great to be with you both. Thank you.
And so you've been following the conversation that we had with the Archbishop Coyne. Would love to get some of your initial thoughts about the conversation. Anything that jumped out to you?
I found it a really interesting conversation. I'm happy to be with you today. I was really struck by how Archbishop Coyne spoke about wanting to walk with the people in his archdiocese and kind of meet people where they are. And it's a very pastoral tone that we've heard also from Pope Francis in the past 11 years of his papacy, someone who really espouses what he calls the culture of encounter, wanting the church to be, as he said, kind of bruised and on the streets and meeting with people, and that people will know it by, its generosity, its openness, and its willingness to kind of meet people where they are and help them with the needs in their lives.
And a big part of our conversation today was talking about the Dignitas Infinita. Can you tell our listeners a bit more about this document and respond to what we heard from the Archbishop?
Yeah, so the document itself is a note from the Vatican's powerful Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, which is kind of charged with setting the guardrails of Catholic theological discussion, or kind of overseeing, the tenets of Catholic doctrine. This particular document had been in the works for about 5 years. Apparently, it had been kind of a point of discussion, and there's a new prefect or new head of this office who's an Argentine cardinal named Victor Fernandez, who kind of wanted to take it in a different direction. He apparently had several conversations with Pope Francis, and a document that was originally meant to be, as we understand it, kind of focused on specific issues of sexual ethics, became a document that was much broader on a lot of range of issues of human dignity, including how the Catholic Church thinks the world should welcome migrants, how people should be able to live in safe communities, how there should be healthcare for people. But certainly two of the aspects that have kind of drawn controversy or drawn interest here in the U.S. are the Vatican repeating its condemnation of the process of gender-affirming surgeries for trans individuals, and the wanting to ban practice of surrogacy or for couples who are infertile or seeking a way to have a child and would contract with another woman to go forward with that process. These aren't new positions, as the Archbishop has said. The Vatican has been clear in their opposition of these practices in the past. What's interesting here is they're saying it quite clearly. It's kind of on the record. But also interesting to note is that Cardinal Fernandez, at the press briefing last week announcing this document, made very clear the Vatican does not countenance discrimination against gay people, and is speaking loudly against laws that continue to criminalize homosexuality, especially in certain nations in Africa, where Pope Francis has spoken very clearly that those laws should be repealed. So it's kind of interesting to watch the Vatican make these statements, but also continue to emphasize pastoral encounter, meeting, and kind of listening to people where they are, as the Archbishop spoke about so eloquently.
And related to what you just mentioned, I want to share a comment that we got on Twitter. The listener shared the fact that the Archbishop continuously used the outmoded term sex change when referring to gender-affirming care is demonstrative of the Church's unwillingness to afford trans people the very dignity of claims to be concerned about. So, Joshua, can you give us some context in terms of how the Church thinks about gender? I'm curious to hear about your thoughts about how the Archbishop's earlier framing of trans identity as an issue to be dealt with and boiling it down to dysphoria.
Yeah, I think it's important to know that the Archbishop was echoing the language in the document itself. The document uses the term sex change. It does not use the term gender-affirming surgery. What I find interesting is it seems the Vatican is doing a bit of a two-step here. We've seen Pope Francis be extraordinary, welcoming to trans persons. He's spoken about meeting with trans individuals, kind of affirming them where they are. I've been on papal trips with Pope Francis in various countries abroad, where he meets with people coming from all different backgrounds, and it's rarely an instance of offering a lecture or trying to make them change their lives. It's more trying to learn what they're going through and learn how the Church can be supportive in their lives. One point of contention about this document that is quite interesting is groups that advocate for Catholic LGBTQ members in the U.S., such as New Ways Ministry or Dignity USA, raised up the fact that this document has been in a process for 5 years, but reading it, it's hard to see or understand if the Vatican took time to listen to some trans individuals about what language in this document might mean for them, or to hear their experience, or why they, the deep personal struggle that they might have in terms of why they would feel gender dysphoria, or why they would feel called to try to present themselves differently, or even go through a gender-affirming surgery. And New Ways Ministry, which is a group that has recently met with Pope Francis for the first time last October, raised this point and said it would have been helpful if the Vatican perhaps had some conversations with trans individuals, and maybe that would have influenced a bit of what the document said.
Well, and you mentioned the issue of surrogacy earlier, which we haven't really touched on too much, and also IVF. This is a rather new issue the Vatican has spoken about. Can you talk about, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's clear that the issue of child surrogacy has been an issue that the Vatican is trying to address more clearly in the past year or so. A year ago, January, Pope Francis for the first time called for a global ban on the practice. And recently here in the U.S. at the UN, the Vatican's designate to the UN, Archbishop Gabriele Caccia, has hosted several meetings to try to raise up the issue and to call for kind of some sort of international agreement to ban the practice of surrogacy. It's important, I think, to say that the Pope and Vatican officials, of course, understand people who want to welcome children into their lives and are facing difficult choices in terms of their own infertility or trying to find a way to do that, given whatever limitations they have. But I think the main point the Vatican has been raising is, the practice of surrogacy does raise some questions in terms of, how do these contracts get made up? How are people remunerated for their care? And, is there a scenario where it can be fair that a couple would offer payment for someone to carry a child for them? And although in the U.S. we could imagine a scenario where there are certain laws in place that would make that equitable or fair, it's hard to know how that would happen in different countries where maybe they don't have the same sets of laws and norms that we do. And as the Archbishop at the UN said, there's a real scenario where in places across the world, wealthy couples are contracting with very impoverished women to have children for them. And that's something the Vatican is raising up as an issue for the global community to discuss.
And as those discussions continue, is there anything else in this document that jumped out to you in particular?
Well, I am struck by the fact that the Vatican and Pope Francis decided not to issue a document that only touched on sexual ethics. I was at a conference here in Washington at the Catholic University of America last week on migration issues. Two bishops were speaking at that conference, and they both cited this document as helpful in terms of helping Americans understand Catholic teaching on migration, how immigrants at the U.S.-Mexico border should be treated with fairness, understanding, and kind of that people have a right to try to find better situations in their lives. And that they were raising up this document is very helpful in terms of helping the American culture and wider society understand Catholic teaching on that issue.
And I want to get your final thoughts here as well, as I've asked Archbishop Coyne earlier. What do you hope our listeners take away from this conversation today?
I think it's been an interesting opportunity here to listen to the new Archbishop of Hartford and kind of get to know the person who will be charged with leading Catholics across the area. And I'm sure it's a great opportunity for listeners to learn about him, learn about his ministry, and also learn about the wider ministry of the Catholic Church and of Pope Francis.
And what are your hopes that he'd be able to accomplish here in Hartford/Connecticut?
As a journalist, I don't really express hopes. I would say I'll be following Archbishop Coyne, and as he takes up the job as Archbishop of Hartford, and looking to see kind of what initiatives he brings forward and how people receive him across the Archdiocese.
Well, I got another quick question here because we've talked about the document has sort of been in process, I think, the last 5 years or so. But this document also dropped during an election year for us. Do you think there's any significance to that?
I don't think so. I think the Vatican had been working on this document for a protracted amount of time. They were clearly looking for a way to kind of finish it up and get it off the Vatican's table. There had been a meeting in January of the members of the congregation in Rome that were, due to kind of review this document. I understand that it received kind of the approval at that time in January, and it's pretty normal that the Vatican would then release the document. After the approval, of course, the Vatican also has to deal with translating the document into various languages. It was probably originally written in Italian or Spanish. And so I don't think there's a real effort here to influence the American election, but more just kind of following the normal procedures for the Vatican.
Well, thank you so much for that. You've been listening to Joshua McElwee, who's the news editor of the National Catholic Reporter. Thank you so much, Joshua, for being with us today and sharing your thoughts.
Well, it's great to be with you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And for our listeners, just another reminder that Connecticut Public, we are having our Spring Pledge Drive. Please consider supporting Where We Live, or your favorite talk shows, or your favorite reporters, or your favorite stories, and all of your favorite programming here with a donation. You can visit ctpublic.org/donate. I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Tess Terrible. Our technical producer is Kat Pastor. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. And thank you so much for listening.